Welcome to Lunch with Tech Leaders, where we have engaging conversations about software development and cloud engineering with industry leaders and subject matter experts. These episodes are created by the Great Lakes Tech Leaders, an online community of technology practitioners. Please come join the conversation by visiting gltl.rbn.ai. Again, that's gltl.rbn.ai. Now strap in, because we're deploying to production in 3, 2, 1.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of Lunch with Tech Leaders. My name is Adam Oberhausen. I'm the Director of Cloud Architecture with Right Brain Networks, and I'm your host for today. Joining me today is software and data consultant Tom Kowalski. Say hi, Tom.
Howdy.
And last but not least, business technology consultant Joe Coleman. What's up, Joe?
What's going on, Adam? Thanks for the kind introduction there.
Yeah, sure thing. So today we're going to be talking about tagging strategies in AWS. We've got a lot to cover today, so grab your lunch and buckle up.
All right, that sounds good to me. And just letting you guys know, for anyone listening live or here in the chat, if you have any questions or anything, go ahead and send it there in the chat, and I'll be sure to make sure that that topic gets covered. So, yeah, don't be afraid to raise your hand and ask questions. We love them.
Thanks, Joe. So Tom, how's your week going?
It's going great. It's cold. It's cold here in Michigan this week.
Certainly is. Had to get out the snowblower.
Yeah. I bought a new jacket. It was time, and
Nice.
It was way too cold for my other one. So yeah, it's a real nice one.
You excited to talk about tagging?
Yeah, I am excited to talk about tagging. Who isn't? I feel like it's that thing that everybody needs to do, right? You got to do it, right? It's very helpful, beneficial, but it can be challenging, right? And especially to be consistent and get the right tags. So yeah, I'm excited to dive in here.
We got anyone special to talk to us today about it?
We do. We have a recurring guest subject matter expert here on the topic, Ray Welker. If you want to introduce yourself.
Hey, Tom. Hey, Adam. Thanks for having me here today. It's good to be back. I'm a cloud solutions engineer here at Right Brain Networks. Have a lot of experience with tagging. Did a cost allocation and tagging talk actually a couple months back with the AWS meetup.
Right on.
Excited to be here. Excited to talk about tags.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right, Tom. I like my history, right? There's an extensive history with tagging.
Sure.
Actually, not so much, but I did. It's always interesting, right? So AWS launches in 2006. There's no tagging until 2009 when they introduced tagging, and it was really basic. You could basically like give things a name, right? That was like all that you could do initially, and then since then, they kept adding to it, and over time, expanding the functionality. Customers are using tags for cost allocation, security, compliance, all the things we're going to talk about today. So that's your history lesson for today.
Yeah, exciting.
So on that note, let's talk about what tags are. What is it? What is a tag? And I want to start at the beginning. What is a tag, Ray? Explain to me a tag in layman's terms.
Well, it's like something to assign meaning to the, whatever you attach it to, right? Clothing has tags. You got to know the brand. You got to know, who wants to put their name on it, what the purpose of it is. If we're talking about like AWS, it's assigning like some sort of meaning to, a key value pair essentially, right? So it's type of metadata. It's data about assigning information to other data.
Yeah, that's real interesting. Metadata comes up a lot, I think, in technology talks, and I always kind of forget what metadata is. But so I looked it up before the show. So metadata is data that provides information about other data, right? So it's just like, and the most common example is like a file. Like you've got a file, right? It's got a file type, it's got a description, it's got the date it was created, it's got the date it was last modified. So that's kind of the way to think about tags in AWS, right? Is like they're just a way to put in metadata about all the stuff you've got going on in AWS, right?
Yeah, exactly that. they're, it's good to have a purpose behind your tags, but yeah, that's the general idea.
So what are some of the purposes, right? What are some of the use cases that you've seen?
Well, I mean, it's assigning like, projects to certain resources. There's a whole kind of idea, at least within Right Brain, that we've described as some of the key tags that you should assign to your resources. Things like owner. Who's responsible for this resource. Maybe that's like a specific team, or a specific individual who maybe is like a subject matter expert about this. Somebody who you can reach out to if you need to know more about a resource. Things such as maybe what automation tool was used to deploy this. Do I want to know if it was deployed via Terraform, CDK, CloudFormation, so on and so forth. Things such as cost center. It's very useful for assigning cost related, or well, I should say it's very useful for figuring out costs related to resources, and more as a broader term, how to allocate those costs to departments within your organization. But yeah, there's a good strategy. Every organization should have its own strategy, and assign what makes sense. You don't want just meaningless tags assigned to resources. You want something that actually contributes value, and you keep it consistent across your resources.
Yeah. What are some of the most important ones? So, like I know you said like cost center. Like what are the big ones? Can you go too far with it? And also, do you maintain them? Like how are they maintained? Like if the owner changes or different things like that.
Yeah. You should certainly audit your tags. You should review them consistently. I think that's a best practice. Do they still make sense? Maybe they made sense in the past. These were assigned to a certain cost center, I guess, 3 months ago. Maybe something has changed internally. Do we need to restructure, what cost centers these are allocated towards? Maybe we should review what values are assigned and, remediate them as necessary. As for important ones, I would say like, project, owner, the purpose of the creation. Those are all very important ones as well.
So going back to cost center, I've struggled with this. Where do you get that from, and who do you work with on what are the cost centers, and what do we care about? Like what different departments do you work with, and how do you coordinate that?
Well, you might have like a development team. Maybe it all depends on the organization, right? It depends on how the organization allocates, certain costs. Or maybe you are like a SaaS provider for you're like an MSP or something like that. Maybe I need to bill the client for the resources that they use. So perhaps the cost center is, client A or client B or, so on and so forth, but we all house it within, maybe they're intermixed within an AWS account or something. It depends on if it's an organization level for your business, or if it really depends on how you do business, I guess. That's what I'm getting at. It could be certain teams, I guess. Do I want to know how much the dev resources are costing? So maybe the dev is a resource bucket that I would, assign as a cost center. Maybe we have our stage, we have our prod. Those are kind of getting more towards environments, but you could have a dev team, an operations team, the data team, for example. Those could be their own cost centers.
Yeah, and how far do you go with it, right? Because I've kind of struggled with that. You kind of set an owner, but I've also seen best practices of setting the phone numbers and Slack channels, right, that the teams belong to. Just I don't know, how far do you usually go?
So I don't go that deep. Some of those can be maybe more. It's tangential. Maybe it could be useful to somebody, but it's maybe not useful to the organization as a whole. I would say there's at least probably 5 main tags that you should assign to any resource. Any more than that, it's up for debate. Maybe there's a purpose behind it for like some sort of automation, but typically, if you have a well-structured AWS account, you have an OU. So you would assign like an organization to what these resources belong to. Perhaps the account. So if you have a multi-account strategy, perhaps this is the client A dev account or something like that. The environment it's for, dev stage prod, the project. That's certainly useful for understanding what resources belong if you create resource groups, or if you are to, you want to set up cost allocation and know how much my prod environment's costing me. And like service is something that it could be it could be as basic of like maybe it's an internal service that this or like an internal application that this service is a part of. I know this is my RDS database for my my web app or something like that. So I like those are I would say the five main ones. There's additional ones like we talked about cost center. It's maybe not crucial to every organization to have that, but that could be an optional one. Owner, like you said, maybe owners change, so maybe that needs to be reviewed and modified. But it might provide somebody some information that if they're looking at it, hey, who should I reach out to if I want to learn more about the configuration of this or something like that. To your other point, you could certainly go too far. Like I think it's important to have meaningful tags, but you can put whatever you want on a resource. If I want to put this is a test or something like that assigned to a resource, like what does that even provide? What kind of value does that provide? You can make the argument that maybe certain resources need additional tags, like in the event of some sort of automation, that I want to query what resources have this tag with this value to it because I want to gather a list of them and maybe do XYZ to them. Certainly one way to go about it. But yeah,
like you could tag something that needs to be backed up periodically, right? And so you would know like the date when you need it to be next backed up or something.
Yep.
But yeah, Ray, they've got a really good approach here, Tom, and like there's like what they would call it like creating a tagging schema, right? So when they're going to work with a customer, you're going to create that tagging schema. That's basically a spreadsheet that kind of talks through all those, key tags and like, why you need it, what the typical values could be. And you're almost like defining like a database schema, but for your tags.
Mm-hmm.
I did a little bit of research for the show, and it's like there are some limits. I think it's like 50 tags per like an EC2 instance. So if you have 50 tags on something, that's like wow. The other services have different tagging limits. Like I think S3 has a 10 tag limit. So there are some constraints there you need to be aware of. I'm not sure if you can just lift request that you get more tags on things like S3 buckets, but in most cases, from what I've seen, is like you can reach out to the AWS support team and increase your quota for things like that.
That's a good point. I don't know if I've ever looked into that, if you can increase a request on my quota for tags on a resource, but I don't think I've ever needed to put 50 tags on something.
Yeah.
Well, that's good. Why don't we? I think Ray talked about a lot of good stuff. Why don't we just maybe work through the list of best practices and kind of comment and see if we're aligned or what are some of the challenges with some of the best practices with tagging. So, tagging strategies, AWS, start with a clear strategy, right? I think that's a no-brainer. I think what I've seen is like in my experience, you kind of get in too deep with AWS, and tagging is like, oh no, we're not tagging, and you're like, you have to kind of go back and like, fix all your mess, because like maybe you weren't thinking. Like I don't think a lot of companies are thinking about tagging when they're going into AWS out of the gate, right? So I think it's easy to get into like a mess and be like, oh, we've been in AWS for 3 years, we don't really have a tagging strategy in place, and our costs are kind of getting out of control, and we don't really understand what all these things are.
Right. So keeping something consistent out there is definitely a good idea to keep in mind when in the forefront.
So how do you enforce that consistency, right? Like who owns it? How do you keep it consistent throughout your organization? What are some of the best practices around that?
There's a couple different ways. You could certainly have a policy that you follow. If you're not, well, let me take a step back. The best way to do it is through AWS organizations and using an organization-wide policy by defining the schema up front. That is the most surefire way of ensuring that your resources follow whatever schema you have in place. So if all resources must be tagged with project, that's something that you can enforce at the organization level.
Got it. So how does that?
That's the service control policies, I believe, right?
Yep.
And so,
And
Ray,
just-
can you clarify, like, if I try to create a resource, like an instance, and it didn't have the tag, what happens?
That's what I was going to ask.
Oh,
Well, one of two things, right? So you can choose to either have resources create that don't follow the policy and have them be non-compliant resources, or upfront you can enforce that they are that they ensure they have these tags in place by having remediation options. I believe I got that understanding correctly. The other thing it could be is that you'll get a warning essentially that this policy is required. If I'm remembering correctly about the organization-wide schema policy. Adam, do you know the exact answer to that?
I don't.
I think we have our resident sleeper expert in the channel.
Hi, this is Todd. So my understanding is that you'd still be able to create a resource that didn't have a tag, but it would be marked non-compliant on your tag policy reports. So if you wanted to enforce that those tags were used, that would take like a separate like service control policy or something of that like. Tag policy is kind of like enforcing a standardization, and it's like a tool for people who are already trying to do the right thing, like using the correct tags. It makes sure that they're formatted correctly, using the correct capitalization and only allowed values.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
Can you automate that? Right. So if you define like the schema and say like this account is dev, this AWS account, can you automate that every resource in there just gets that, environment equals dev tag on it? Or is that?
So, I mean, you could do it if you're using an automation tool.
Okay.
Certainly, yeah. Is there a way through organizations to do that, Todd?
Not through organizations, because you can't really do automation through organizations. But you can, there's a couple of ways I think you can approach that. You can set up like maybe a config rule that triggers off of resource creation that then runs some sort of remediation that applies that tag for you.
Mm-hmm.
That would be like a Lambda function, maybe, as simple
So
as
some custom logic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
all right. So best practice number 2 is use meaningful and descriptive keys. Want to avoid things like tag 1, tag 2, right? I think it goes without saying. But yeah, descriptive tags. I think. Do you have any have you seen stuff out in the wild, Ray? Do you do like a nice short concise tag, or do people get over the top with stuff?
Yeah, I think one use case here was an interesting one. It was kind of necessary at the time. More so, it was a workaround for the inability to use Cost Explorer, unfortunately, and we were using a third-party service called Cloud Health. So we had to create some custom tags that were different per resource, but they were necessary at the time, so we could utilize the billing section within Cloud Health to build us automated reports. But yeah, the keys and the keys themselves were a little non-descriptive, mostly because they were essentially the cost center themselves, and it was kind of a hack in place to generate a report that listed the keys as the cost center and attributed all the costs to that specific cost center. So it was kind of a workaround, I would say, just due to some limitations with the tool. But yeah, you should keep them short and concise. They should make sense. If I read the key, I should know what the purpose is. What is the relevance to the OU tag on it? okay, this belongs to the organization. This belongs to the dev account. This belongs to a specific project. I guess that's the point behind it, is that you're consistent with your tags across your resource, and that they are concise and they make sense.
Yeah, well said. Best practice number 3, use consistent values. So that's talking about the format of the tags. You want to use like the same uppercase or all lowercase, or dash in between, so that one team's not creating wildly different looking tags than some other team. But that all comes back down to, I think, just enforcing the standardization at the organizational level through service control policies seems like the blanket way to solve a lot of like that inconsistency stuff that you're mentioning, Ray.
Definitely, because I mean, like, the thing is, a lowercase OU is not the same as uppercase OU when it comes to generating a report. There will be a difference between resources that are reported as uppercase OU versus lowercase OU. I guess to keep it consistent, you need to keep things consistent so your reports are accurate. Whether it's a cost and billing report or if it's some sort of compliance report. Capitalization matters. Consistency matters.
Yeah. Best practice number 4, use tags for cost allocation. We've talked about this. What's interesting that the listener should know is that in order for your tags to show up in the billing console, you actually have to activate them. Is that correct, Ray?
That is, yeah.
Yeah. So, and there's like a delay there, which it's always interesting to me when you come across something in AWS where you have to like wait 24 hours for it to like propagate. So, they're definitely doing some batch processing there, in that you have to go into the console and pick and choose which tags you want to activate as cost allocation tags. And once you do that, then you're able to like slice and dice your cost explorer in a way that probably really gets your finance people excited, I'm guessing.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, there's definitely an importance of understanding how your resources are contributing to the cost, and you want to get that, like a microscope over those resources. How do you do that? It all comes from tagging your resources appropriately and then assigning cost allocation tags, so you understand where your money's going.
Yeah, and I should say it should be on the engineers that are deploying stuff in AWS. Like, they should be aware and have an understanding of how much it costs to run their services, right?
I agree.
I've seen some orgs that kind of keep that information under wraps. I'm not sure why. Like, you don't have access to the billing console, so you can't see. And then it's like, how are you supposed to make sure you're building cost-effective solutions if you don't even have the visibility into how much it costs to run your workload, right?
I will attest that understanding costs in AWS is that's a whole topic in itself, and it's a very large thing to digest. Am I necessarily looking at the cost when I'm going to spin up a R5X large instance or something like that? Probably not. Maybe we need it for the job because I know it needs my service needs that level of memory and CPU, but understanding the underlying costs behind it is very important, and that gets into the whole topic of you should be reserving instances, and I think it's kind of a top-down approach, right? Management should be instilling, or leaders should be instilling into engineers and whatnot to kind of understand how these resources are impacting the environment, and definitely the cost for such things.
Yeah. Best practice number 5, one that don't have a lot of hands-on experience with, but using tags for security and access controls. Now, I knew it could be done. I guess I've never really seen it in practice. I've worked with HIPAA compliant environments. I've worked in SOC 2 environments, but I guess I've never really seen how tags, actually help enable or automate some of the compliance requirements.
Well, the biggest thing, I guess, with that is that with IAM, you can set up IAM policies so that they have conditional access between the principal and the resource. So the principal is generally the resource that's making a request to a resource. Say I have a conditional that on my IAM role, this there's an automation in the background that's saying list all S3 buckets. That role itself has a policy assigned to it with a conditional statement saying string like if key is equal to project and the value is equal to red, for example, that role will only be able to request S3 buckets that have the project equal red key assigned to it. Those will be the only S3 buckets that are returned whenever I do a list all buckets in AWS, via like the CLI or via an automation or something like that. So it's a way of ensuring that certain roles are only able to access resources that they're conditionally allowed to.
Yeah. So like you could basically say if something's confidential or has, PII within it, you can really limit the, you can, if you, assuming you have kind of like a tagging enforcement policy, you're really tight, you can really leverage it to like control access levels throughout all your AWS resources.
You made a really good point there. Such as the compliance level. I mean, I think that would be a very important tag to assign to a resource to know whether or not this is, PHI or PII or, this is a NIST compliant resource or something like that. That's a great way of enforcing security, especially coupled with IAM policies. There might not be a great way to do that without that tag.
Did you have something you want to say, Tom? All right, move on to the next one. Okay. I feel like I'm always talking over you or interrupting you when you're trying to talk. Wrapping up the best practices here, we got use tags for resource management. Let's start with what is a resource group, because I'm not even clear exactly what that is.
So I mean, it's resource groups are like a behind the scenes, it's an AWS service essentially. It's a collection of your resources that you can create grouped by your AWS resource tags. That's pretty much just the basics of it.
So you could take a pile of stuff, it's just a group of AWS resources, and you say, I want to put these in a group. Like I want to say this, all these things are part of the, research and development group or something.
Yeah, you got it. Yeah.
Okay.
You then group them by, you sort your stuff into groups based on tags. Essentially is the nuts and bolts of it.
So how does using resources, using resource groups, does it help the tagging, or how can it what's the synergy there?
Resource groups help in terms of just kind of organizing and managing your resources. So kind of getting a centralized view of all of your resources to essentially find what pertains to whatever groups you set up. I think, like you said, here's the resource and development group. If I want to know, what EC2 instances are a part of this, I can, essentially through this centralized view, hit a drop down, see the EC2s that are there in the console, and list them out.
Yeah.
I mean, I
think it's making sense.
Do something with.
You could probably do something similar in the billing console.
Yeah.
In terms of like slicing and dicing, but this actually is kind of more. It's more on just the non-billing console side. So you could actually just go in and like look at your resources assigned to a group, kind of like at a larger high level view, or something that's accessible right through the console, right?
Yep. Increase your level of visibility, which I think caters to all the other best practices we talked about. If I have greater visibility into my assets, I'm better able to increase the level of security that we have, maybe make sense of my cost and billing a little bit better, and just kind of ensuring that we're meeting our compliance and whatnot. So, yeah.
Okay. Rounding out the best practices, I think this is one we're going to spend a few minutes on, but that is, automating tag management. Which is, you've got thousands of resources in your AWS account. Even if you're a small shop, you could have hundreds, of network interfaces, S3 buckets, volumes. So what are our options to automate actually putting a tag on a resource at the point it is created? What's the best way? What are some of the best ways to solve that and make that work?
I would say just having good infrastructure as code. Your code can be audited. You can ensure that your resources are being tagged properly. If you're doing it manually, if you're creating resources manually, I would say at that point, ensuring that you're able to get a report that tells you what's non-compliant, so that way you can meet your own your own policies, or coming up with some sort of automation via Lambda or an AWS config rule that does the remediation essentially for you. Best part, yeah, best way is keep things in infrastructure as code. Ensure your resources are being tagged appropriately. If you're dealing with multiple environments, you need to come up with I would say, a strategy for how you deploy your various environments. So, parameterizing variables, not hard coding things, and ensuring that the proper values are being passed in from your environment stacks. So,
yeah, and some of the things that were helpful that I came across is infrastructure as code. If it's all cloud formation, it can be a bit verbose, right, and hard to hit all of those. But some of the abstractions, right, like CDK or serverless framework, really help with that, where you kind of just set, hey, here's the tag, and those underlying constructs, and automatically apply those, right, to all the resources. Yeah, it's been really helpful.
Yeah, I was thinking about, as Ray was talking, kind of tying back to what you said earlier, Tom. Like, it just it could be very verbose to do it in like a cloud formation, but having like you said, if something's going into a dev environment, just automatically, doesn't matter, just automatically tag everything that's launched in there with a dev tag or something like that to make it less prone to being not tagged properly.
The other thing is, I guess with Terraform, you could do test-driven infrastructure. You could write a test that ensures your resources are tagged appropriately. There is natively, it's a third-party library, but there are Terraform libraries out there that allow for you to write provision tests essentially for your infrastructure. Another way to go about it, Terraform being a little bit more not as verbose as CloudFormation, but it's not something that has the power of like CDK or serverless behind it to enforce it kind of at a construct level.
Yeah, I kind of like that, adding them right into the tests for the application, right into your CD pipeline, making sure they get the tags on them. Yeah.
Have you ever been in a scenario, Ray or Tom, where it's like the company already has a plethora of AWS resources and they're want to get more serious about tagging? Like, is there a strategy to like go back and tag things that were not previously tagged? That's like, is there like a playbook for that, or is it like really challenging because every organization is different?
Yeah, it's always a challenge, I would say. I mean, that takes you to the point of analyzing how they deploy infrastructure. Hopefully it's some sort of infrastructure as code at that point. Makes it a little bit easier. And it's, I think, adopting policy. It's better to do it right up front, and it's a challenge doing it retroactively, is what I will say.
Yeah, it's all these things like, if you knew what you knew now, like, create multiple AWS accounts when you get started, put those accounts under an organization, write as tagging policy right out of the gate, that covers the entire organization. Like, these are the tough lessons that I wish I had known, when I was getting started in AWS several years ago.
Yeah. And some of the things, right, have come out new and recent, right? But what's been really helpful, throughout the organizations that I've worked with is just working with experts in the field, right? And that, when you're doing something new, you're migrating to a new technology. Reaching out to there's a plethora of resources out there to help with that.
And I will state as well, even if it is a challenge, I would say it's definitely something that should not be avoided, no matter what level of effort, because you are going to gain the benefits of having resource tags, like we talked about. The visibility into your resources via cost optimization and cost explorer, the ability to organize your resources, the increased level of security and compliance that you could gain if you make use of this. And just overall, that visibility into your AWS account. Like, those things are, a wealth of knowledge and to have at your fingertips if you do this appropriately. If you do this thoroughly.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to end it there, Ray. Thanks everyone for joining today. It's been a great conversation. Feel free to hang out for a few minutes after the show. Tom and I always like to chat it up, so hang out if you'd like. But yeah, thanks for tuning in. We hope you found the conversation informative and valuable. We'd love to have everyone back next week when we're going to be talking about ChatGPT, my new sidekick for every piece of work I do, and the future of AI. So as always, we're going to try to bring in some expert guests, have some interactive conversation. So please come check it out. So lunch is over. Now, Tom?
Get back to work.
There it is. Bye, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.